My name is Emily. I'm 24 years old, living on my own for the first time. The responsibility of managing life with my own earnings weighs heavily on me. Despite the occasional loneliness and challenges, I've been able to stay positive, thanks to my family's support. Today, I want to share the story of my precious family. As a child, I adored my parents. My father was kind and gentle, my mother cheerful and lively. Though Dad was often busy with work, he made up for it by taking Mom and me on drives and shopping trips on his days off. Mom could be stern, but she always showered me with love. I always thought we'd be together forever, but happiness left me unexpectedly fast. One summer day in my first year of elementary school, I returned home to find my parents missing. It was my 7th birthday, and Dad had promised to take the day off for a family outing. Without a house key, I repeatedly rang the doorbell to no avail. Thinking they might be out buying a birthday cake, I waited in the yard, playing with a ball and drawing in my sketchbook. But as darkness fell and they still hadn't returned, anxiety set in. As darkness fell and fear gripped me, I stood alone at the front door, crying, "Emily?" That's when I heard my name. I looked towards the sound, realizing it wasn't my parents' voice. "Grandma, Grandpa?" There they were, my grandparents, looking at me with concern. The appearance of my grandparents, who knew me well, brought a sense of relief that only made my tears flow more. They had come to give me my birthday present, holding a large gift box. But at that moment, I couldn't feel happy. My grandmother, after hearing my story, first called our home from her cell phone. Only the faint ringing from inside the house was heard, with no one answering. She tried calling my parents' cell phones too, but couldn't get through. After about 2 hours of waiting at the front door with my grandparents, with no sign of my parents returning, we decided to go to their house at the next station. It was my birthday today. It was the first time my parents had not returned home, and I had been so looking forward to this day, so I was incredibly sad. However,
Your father and mother were also looking forward to celebrating your birthday, so let's have them do it tomorrow. Today, let's have a fun party with us.
my grandparents consoled me. They comforted me, bought a cake on the way home, and even cooked a feast, which helped me forget my anxieties. Eventually, I ended up staying at my grandparents' house, and my parents didn't return the next morning or the day after. Someday, my parents will definitely come back. I kept waiting, holding on to that belief. About a month into living at my grandparents' house,
Emily, how about you move in with us?
my grandmother suggested. I was taken aback as I had thought my stay was only temporary until my parents returned. However,
It seems your father and mother won't be able to return for a while.
my grandparents sadly informed me. Surprisingly, I didn't wail or protest. I accepted the situation. I had been attending my previous elementary school, driven by my grandmother, but after moving in with my grandparents, I transferred to a school within walking distance and started a new life. Despite not hearing from my parents and growing into a high school student, my grandparents' abundant love and care helped me stay positive and on track. During this time, I loved drawing and was involved in both the volleyball and illustration clubs in middle school. I posted my illustrations on social media, participated in city exhibitions, and dreamt of a career related to art. My grandparents always supported my dreams,
Emily is really talented at drawing. We're so proud to have such a wonderful granddaughter.
proudly declaring. However, in the summer of my second year of high school, my beloved grandmother fell ill. I wanted to skip volleyball practice to visit her in the hospital,
Please pursue what you want to do.
guided by my grandmother's wish to pursue my passions. I visited her on holidays and days off from club activities. Despite her terminal illness and diminishing health, she always greeted me with a smile. Half a year into her battle, during her illness, my grandmother, with a serious expression, revealed something she had kept from me.
There's something I haven't told you, Emily.
What is it? She said, shocked. I immediately asked what it was.
It's about your father and mother.
Hearing this, I was even more surprised. My parents had been absent since my 7th birthday, with no contact since then. This unexpected revelation about them from my grandmother was startling and filled me with a sense of foreboding. Yeah, nodding nervously, I braced myself for my grandmother's next words. Then she dropped a bombshell I never saw coming.
Your father and mother. They've passed away.
I was stunned, my mind going blank. For 10 years, I had harbored a secret hope that they might return. I wondered if I had been abandoned, I thought to myself, reflecting on the past. Despite these doubts, I remembered the morning of that fateful day when my parents sent me off with their usual loving smiles.
I promise to take you anywhere.
My dad said, and I will make all your favorite meals, my mom said. Their loving assurances never felt like lies. Sometimes I wondered if they had been caught in an accident or incident, or even if they might have died. But facing the reality of their death was overwhelmingly painful. Is it really true? I asked, finding it hard to believe. The thought of my grandmother lying about something so grave was unthinkable. This had to be the truth. When I asked, my grandmother nodded with tears in her eyes.
After your parents disappeared, the police issued a search warrant. Your dad's car wasn't at home, and they had left in it for sure. The police had the house unlocked, but found no clues.
My grandmother explained. I was too young at the time to understand these details.
But after a while, the police found them.
She continued, her voice trembling.
Their car had fallen off a cliff on a mountain road. The impact caused it to catch fire, burning so intensely that the occupants were unrecognizable. That's why it took so long to get in touch.
My grandmother, who always smiled in front of me, was talking about her son. Hearing about such a tragic end to their lives was unbearable. The authorities couldn't let a young child like me see the remains of my parents, who were beyond recognition. My grandmother had hidden this painful truth all along.
I'm sorry for keeping this from you,
she said tearfully. Please don't apologize, Grandma. You've given me a loving home and raised me when I was alone. I'm truly grateful. As I supported her,
thank you, Emily. You're such a kind child.
She wiped away her tears and smiled. The reality that my parents had died over 10 years ago was incredibly painful. I had always hoped to see their loving faces again, believing we would be reunited someday. I cried alone on my way home from the hospital. Rest in peace, dear Mom and Dad. A month later, my beloved grandmother also passed away from her illness, leaving just me and my grandfather in the family home. My grandfather, a retired company employee, lives on his savings and pension. He refuses to accept any money from my part-time job earnings.
Emily, you're my granddaughter. I'd rather you spend that money on things you enjoy.
He always says, but I want to help him somehow. I felt I hadn't done enough for my grandmother before she passed, and now I wanted to show my gratitude to him in any way I could. That's what I've been thinking. So, in my final year of high school, I changed my plans from attending an art school to finding a job. I wanted to start working as soon as possible to ease my grandfather's burden. That was my wish. Although I knew he would oppose it, I couldn't make such a decision without consulting him. I've decided to start working after graduation, I told him. As expected, he objected, but he eventually accepted my decision after I assured him I had no regrets. I began job hunting in the summer, and by autumn, I had secured a position. Opportunities for high school graduates weren't plentiful, but I managed to find something.
Are you sure it's okay?
Grandfather, though worried, celebrated my job offer by ordering more sushi than we could eat, saying it was a celebration. After I started my job, I used my first paycheck to take him out for sushi and bought him a stylish hat and umbrella, which suited him perfectly.
You didn't have to do all this,
he said, but ultimately, he was moved to tears.
To think the little Emily has grown up so much,
he would say, and I would respond, I am who I am today because of the love and care you and Grandma gave me. Thank you so much. I planned to continue showing my appreciation to my grandfather, but then he suddenly suffered a heart failure and passed away the next night. I was in shock, unable to accept this reality. Just yesterday, he was so lively. This loss, compounded with the earlier loss of my parents, filled me with fear. Now, I had no family left. Even in loneliness, my grandparents who used to embrace me are no longer here. Overwhelmed by an unbearable sense of loneliness without my grandparents, my body trembled. Despite my relatives' concerned voices, I was too absorbed in my sorrow to hear them. I regretted not being able to do enough for my grandfather, always being the one protected, never able to give back. My apologies, my silent sorrow, filled my thoughts during his funeral. As I blankly watched the smoke rise from his cremation,
Are you Emily?
a voice addressed me from behind. Turning around, I saw an unfamiliar man in his 30s, probably a funeral attendee. Yes, I am. Responding affirmatively,
I am Johnson. I was very close to your father when he was alive.
he bowed deeply and said, "Father?" This was one of the first times I heard about my father from someone other than my grandparents. Just the mention of him was enough to make me feel like crying all over again.
Your father and I were childhood friends. We've been close family friends since we were kids, so your grandfather was always very kind to me.
Mr. Johnson smiled gently, but his eyes were swollen, showing he had been crying. "I see, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming today," I said. Mr. Johnson handed me a large tea-colored envelope.
This is something your grandfather left for you.
As I gently accepted it, I saw to Emily written on it with a brush. Inside were 3 sheets of paper resembling a letter and a smaller white envelope. I first opened the letter, which seemed to be from my grandfather. It was filled with words of love for me. I always complained that his elaborate handwriting was hard to read when I was little, but now his gentle strokes felt dear to me. Tears flowed as I read each character of his letter. Then Mr. Johnson said,
When your grandmother passed away, he wrote a letter to you, thanking his time was also short. I continued my relationship with your grandfather even after your father's death, and he asked me to give you this letter and share stories about your father.
It seemed like a thoughtful gesture from my grandfather, maybe to make my late father feel closer to me. Mr. Johnson then shared numerous memories of my dad. How, as a child, my dad got lost on the way home, engrossed in catching bugs. The fist fights he had in middle school. The fact that my mom was a junior in the same club as my dad in high school, introduced to him by Mr. Johnson. In college, how deeply my dad loved my mom, always sharing sweet stories about their relationship. Listening to these stories filled me with a sense of closeness to my parents, whose history I never fully knew. "Thank you so much." After thanking Mr. Johnson and parting ways, I returned home and remembered another envelope inside the tea-colored one he had given me. It was slightly yellowed with age. Wonder what this is? Curiously, I opened it, and tears I thought had subsided began to flow again. Inside was a warm birthday card. As I opened it, a pop-up bouquet held by a rabbit emerged, accompanied by the sound of a mechanical music box. Even after 12 years, it played perfectly, its clinking melody incredibly dear to me. This card contained letters from my parents, written 13 years ago. My mom's message read,
Happy 7th birthday, Emily. We're amazed at how grown up you've become since starting elementary school. We can't wait to see what kind of girl you'll become. Let's create lots of memories. We love you.
Below it was my father's words.
Happy birthday, Emily. Did you have fun today? I love you at 7, 8, 10, 20, and even at 80. Be yourself and never forget your dreams. I always pray for your happiness.
Receiving these long overdue expressions of love from my parents was incredibly meaningful. Though I had believed in their love, there had been moments of doubt. Since my 7th birthday, I hadn't seen them. Was their love for me real, or was it just a dream? These thoughts, once clear, had begun to blur into uncertainty. But now I knew they had loved me until the end. My father's words, "Live without forgetting your dreams," inspired me to chase my aspirations again. I realized that even though I would be living alone, I wasn't truly alone. I had memories of my parents' and grandparents' love. Encouraged by the love of my cherished family, I decided to once again pursue my dream of working in a field related to drawing, a dream I had almost given up on. I quit my job, enrolled in an art school, and started participating in contests and posting on social media. My perseverance paid off, and I now earn my living as an illustrator. With a loving partner, we plan to marry next year, and I hope to one day extend the same boundless love to our future family that my parents and grandparents gave me.